Edward Collins adjusted his tie as he walked into the great hall of the Galactic Assembly. The enormous circular room hummed with the voices of 27 different species. Some floated in special tanks. Others stood on raised platforms. A few hovered using personal gravity devices. Humans were among the few who simply walked on two legs. "Ambassador Collins, you seem troubled today," said Zentar, a tall blue-skinned diplomat from the Arcturus system. "Just thinking about the reports from the outer systems," Edward replied. He nodded to several other aliens as he made his way to the human section. The assembly had existed for over 2,000 years. Humanity had only joined 15 years ago, when faster-than-light travel became possible for Earth ships. They were still seen as newcomers, as children who needed guidance. Edward sat down next to Lisa Martinez, his deputy and military liaison. She handed him a datapad. "More bad news?" he asked. "The Voidborn have taken 3 more planets in the Deneb sector," she whispered. "No survivors reported." Edward closed his eyes briefly. The Voidborn had appeared 8 months ago. No one knew where they came from. No one knew what they wanted, except to conquer and destroy. They looked like tall shadows with too many limbs and eyes that glowed purple in the dark. "The assembly will begin today's session," announced the speaker, a floating crystal being from an ancient race. Edward watched as various diplomats came forward to speak. They talked about trade routes. They talked about cultural exchange programs. They talked about anything except the growing threat. Finally, a small green diplomat from Rigel stepped up. "We must discuss the Voidborn threat. My people have lost contact with our colony on Rigel 7. The hall grew quiet. The speaker floated higher. "We understand your concern, Representative. The Assembly has formed a committee to study the Voidborn and recommend action." "Study." The Rigel diplomat's skin darkened with emotion. "While you study, my people die. Hasty action leads to greater tragedy," said another diplomat, this one a massive creature that looked like a gentle elephant. "The Valyrian Accord recommends observation for at least 1 standard year before interventional response." Edward leaned toward Lisa. "The Valyrians won't be so calm when the Voidborn reach their worlds." "By then it might be too late for all of us," she replied. The debate continued for hours. Some races wanted to send peace envoys. Others suggested building better defenses. The oldest races counseled patience above all. None suggested direct military action. When the session ended, Edward felt a familiar frustration. He walked with Lisa toward the human embassy wing of the massive space station. Earth Command sent a new transmission. Lisa said once they were alone, "We've lost contact with 2 survey ships near Taz City." Edward stopped walking. "That's 3 ships this month. The Admiral thinks they're testing our defenses, seeing how we respond." Edward looked out a viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Voidborn were moving, conquering, killing, and the greatest alliance of species in the galaxy was responding with committees and studies. "I have a call with the President in an hour," Edward said. "What do you think she'll say?" Lisa's face grew serious. "She'll ask if the Assembly is going to help, and when you tell her they're still debating, she'll ask what options we have on our own." Edward nodded. Earth was new to space, but humans understood war. They understood that sometimes you had to fight or be destroyed. "The Assembly thinks we're too young, too impulsive," Edward said quietly. "They don't understand that sometimes action is necessary. They've been at peace so long they've forgotten how to fight," Lisa replied. As they continued walking, Edward made a decision. He would give the Assembly one more chance to take real action. After that, humanity would need to choose its own path, even if it meant standing alone. Edward was about to enter his office when the emergency alerts began to sound throughout the embassy. Red lights flashed in the hallway. He turned and ran back toward the communication center, his heart racing. Lisa met him at the door. Her face was pale. "It's Proxima Centauri. Our colony there has gone dark." Proxima was humanity's first colony beyond the solar system. Over 8,000 people lived there now. It was the pride of Earth's space program. When did we lose contact? Edward asked, looking at the large screen showing the star map. 30 minutes ago. The automated distress signal activated, then cut off mid-transmission. Lisa pulled up the partial message. The screen showed panicked colonists running. Strange dark shapes moved in the background. Voidborn ships, Edward said, pointing to shadows in the sky. The door opened, and several other human staff members rushed in. They gathered around the screens, faces grim. "Has anyone told the assembly?" Edward asked. "I sent an emergency notification," said Alan Parker, one of the communication officers. "They've called for an immediate session." Within an hour, the assembly hall was full. Representatives from all 27 species had gathered. The mood was tense. Even the oldest, calmest races seemed concerned now. The speaker called for order. "We have received disturbing news from the human colony at Proxima Centauri. Ambassador Collins, please share what you know." Edward walked to the center of the hall. On the giant screens around him, he displayed the last images from Proxima. The sight of human colonists fleeing, of voidborn ships descending, made the hall fall silent. 8,342 humans lived on Proxima, Edward said, his voice steadied despite his anger. "We have lost all contact. Based on previous voidborn attacks, we must assume the worst." A representative from Sirius, a longtime ally of Earth, stood up. "The Assembly extends its deepest sympathies to humanity for this tragedy." "Sympathies are not enough," Edward replied. "We need action. The Voidborn are expanding. Today it's Proxima. Tomorrow it could be Sirius, or Vega, or any of your worlds." The elder diplomat from Arcturus floated forward. "We understand your pain, Ambassador, but rash action may only make things worse. We propose sending a scientific expedition to study the aftermath and gather more data about the Voidborn." Edward stared in disbelief. "Study the aftermath? While my people's bodies are still warm. What would you have us do?" asked another diplomat. "The Assembly has not engaged in military action in over 500 years. "Then perhaps it's time to remember how," Edward said. The debate went on for hours. Some younger species supported human calls for action. The elder races counseled caution, study, and diplomatic outreach. Edward finally left the session early, disgusted by the lack of resolve. He returned to the embassy to find Lisa waiting with new information. "Earth Defense Force has sent a stealth probe to Proxima," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "We have footage. It's worse than we thought." The images on her screen made Edward's blood run cold. The colony buildings stood emptied, damaged. But it was the collection centers that horrified him, places where the Voidborn had gathered humans. "They're not just killing," Lisa whispered. "They're harvesting. Biological materials, genetic samples. They're treating humans like resources." Edward turned away from the screen, fighting to maintain his composure. "The President has seen this." "Yes. She's calling an emergency meeting of Earth's government. They're voting on a response." Edward's secure communication device buzzed. A message from Earth, marked highest priority. He read it twice to be sure he understood. "We have our orders," he said finally. "What does Earth Command want us to do?" Lisa asked. Edward looked back at the terrible images from Proxima. His decision was made. "Tomorrow, I'm going to tell the Assembly something they haven't heard in 500 years. "What's that?" "That humanity is going to war, with or without them." The next morning, Edward walked into the Assembly Hall with purpose in his steps. Lisa and 2 other human diplomats followed him. They carried data tablets with the evidence from Proxima. Edward wore the formal diplomatic uniform of Earth, dark blue with silver trim. His face showed no emotion, but inside, he felt a storm. The hall was already full. News about Proxima had spread. Many diplomats approached Edward with words of sympathy. He nodded politely but did not stop to talk. "The Assembly will now discuss the situation at Proxima Centauri," announced the speaker. "We have formed a special committee to study the voidborn threat and recommend." "Point of order," Edward interrupted, his voice cutting through the hall. The speaker paused, crystal form glowing with surprise. "Ambassador Collins, the agenda has already been set." "I invoke Section 12 of the Assembly Charter," Edward said clearly. "The right of emergency address in times of immediate threat." A murmur ran through the gathered diplomats. Section 12 was rarely used. "Very well," the speaker conceded. "The floor is yours, Ambassador." Edward walked to the center of the chamber. The lights dimmed slightly, and all eyes turned to him. "For 15 years, humanity has been honored to be part of this assembly," he began. "We have learned from your wisdom. We have shared in your peace. We have hoped for a bright future among the stars." He paused, looking around the room. "Yesterday, 8,342 humans on Proxima Centauri were killed or captured by the Voidborn. They were not just killed. They were harvested like crops, like resources." Edward touched his tablet, and images appeared on the giant screens around the hall. The evidence was clear and terrible. Even the most composed diplomats showed signs of distress. "The Voidborn have attacked 12 worlds in the past 8 months, Edward continued. "They have destroyed 4 species completely. They have harvested millions of sentient beings, and this assembly has done nothing but study and debate." The Arcturian diplomat floated forward. "Ambassador, we understand your grief, but hasty action is sometimes necessary," Edward finished for him. "When your house is burning, you don't form a committee to study the fire. You act." He stood straighter, looking at each section of the hall. "I came here today not to ask for sympathy, not to beg for help. I came to inform you of humanity's decision." The hall grew very quiet. "As of this moment, Earth and all human colonies are mobilizing for war against the Voidborn. We're going to war." Gasps and cries of shock filled the room. No species had ever declared unilateral war while part of the assembly. It simply wasn't done. "Ambassador Collins." The speaker's voice rose above the noise. "This is unprecedented. The assembly must vote on any military action." "We are not asking the assembly to fight," Edward replied calmly. "We are informing you that humanity will fight, with or without your help." The eldest diplomat, a Valyrian who had seen 1,000 years, moved forward slowly. "You are too young, too inexperienced. The Voidborn technology far exceeds your own. This is suicide." Edward nodded. "Perhaps. But we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. We would rather fight than watch more of our people be harvested like animals." He touched his tablet again. New images appeared, showing Earth's ships preparing for battle. "Humanity remembers what some of you have forgotten. That peace is precious, but sometimes it must be defended with force. That freedom requires sacrifice." Lisa stepped forward, handing Edward a small data crystal. He inserted it into the central podium. "This contains all our intelligence on the Voidborn, their movements, their tactics, their technology. It is our gift to the assembly. Use it as you will." Edward looked around one final time. "Earth goes to war tomorrow. Any species who wishes to join us will be welcomed as allies. Those who do not, we ask only that you remember us if we fall." He turned and walked toward the exit. The hall erupted in chaos behind him. "Edward," Lisa said quietly. "What now?" "Now," he replied, "we prepare to fight." Fleet Admiral Olivia Daniels stood on the bridge of the EFSS Defiance, Earth's newest and most powerful warship. Through the main viewport, she watched as hundreds of ships gathered in Earth orbit. Some were large battleships. Others were small, fast attack vessels. All were armed and ready for war. "Admiral, we have a secure transmission from Ambassador Collins," said a young communications officer. "Put him through," Olivia ordered. Edward's face appeared on the main screen. He looked tired but determined. "Admiral, how goes the preparation?" 217 ships ready for combat. Ambassador. Another 50 will join us at the rally point near Alpha Centauri. Edward nodded. Any word from the Assembly? Officially, they still disapprove of our actions. Unofficially, Olivia smiled slightly. 7 species have contacted us with offers of support. The Tellarites have sent shield technology. The Aronians have shared star maps of Voidborn movements. Better than nothing, Edward said. What about the Voidborn? Any response to our declaration? Olivia's face grew serious. Yes, they sent a single message to all our communication channels. Submit or be eliminated. Not much for conversation, are they? Edward's attempt at humor didn't hide his concern. Ambassador, are you sure about this? Earth has never fought an interstellar war before. We've never had a colony wiped out before either, Edward replied. The President and Joint Chiefs are unanimous. We fight. The communication ended, and Olivia turned to Captain Frank Russell, the commander of the Defiance. Captain, prepare your crew. We launch in 6 hours. Frank nodded and left the bridge. He walked through the corridors of the massive ship, nodding to crew members as he passed. Everyone looked tense but ready. He entered his ready room and found his executive officer, Samantha Howard, reviewing battle plans. How's the crew, Sam? He asked. Scared but determined, she answered honestly. Most have family on Earth or the colonies. They know what's at stake. Frank sat down heavily in his chair. Enemy forces outnumber us 3-1. Their technology is more advanced. The Assembly thinks we're committing suicide. The Assembly hasn't fought a war in 500 years, Sam replied. We have something they don't. What's that? Experience with being the underdog, she said with a small smile. Humans have a long history of fighting against bad odds. Frank studied the tactical display showing their planned route. We'll make our first stand at Taw City. Intelligence shows Voidborn ships gathering there for another attack. A chance to surprise them, Sam said. They won't expect us to have mobilized so quickly. 6 hours later, the massive human fleet broke Earth orbit. Ships of all sizes moved in formation toward the jump point that would take them to Alpha Centauri, their first stop on the way to war. On the Defiance, Admiral Daniels addressed the fleet. Her voice was transmitted to every ship. Men and women of Earth, today we fight not just for our planet, but for all who would live free from fear. The Voidborn believe we will submit. They believe we are weak because we are young. Today, we prove them wrong. The ships reached the jump point and, one by one, disappeared into faster-than-light travel. Back at the Galactic Assembly, Edward watched the fleet's progress on a secure channel. Lisa stood beside him. It's done, he said quietly. No turning back now. Ambassador, Lisa said, pointing to the door. We have visitors. 3 aliens entered the human embassy area. One was a Tellarite, short and stocky. Another was an Aronian, tall and graceful. The third was from the Vega Collective, humanoid but with silvery skin. Ambassador Collins, the Tellarite said, we come with a message from our governments. Edward waited. Humanity does not fight alone. The Aronian continued. Our ships await yours at Alpha Centauri. For the first time in days, Edward felt a spark of hope. Perhaps humanity's stand would inspire others to fight too. The war had begun. The Taw CD system glowed on the tactical display of the Defiance's bridge. Red dots showed Voidborn ships. Blue dots showed human vessels and their new allies. Captain Frank Russell studied the display with intense focus. 17 Voidborn ships detected, reported the sensor officer. They appear to be attacking the mining outpost on the 4th planet. Admiral Daniels turned to the communication station. Open a channel to all ships. When the channel was ready, she spoke clearly. This is Admiral Daniels. The Voidborn are attacking innocent civilians. Our mission is clear. Stop them and save as many lives as possible. Remember your training. Remember Proxima. Engage according to Battle Plan Delta. The human fleet split into 3 groups. The main force, led by the Defiance, would attack head-on. Two smaller groups would circle around to flank the enemy. "The Voidborn have spotted us," Sam reported from her station. "They're breaking off their attack on the outpost and moving to engage." Frank took a deep breath. All weapons ready. Shields at maximum. The space between the fleets lit up as energy weapons fired. The Defiance shook as enemy shots hit its shields. "Return fire," Frank ordered. Human ships were more heavily armored than most in the galaxy. What they lacked in advanced technology, they made up for in durability and firepower. The first Voidborn ship exploded under concentrated fire from 3 human cruisers. The bridge crew cheered. "Don't celebrate yet," Admiral Daniels cautioned. "We've got a long fight ahead." The battle raged for hours. Human ships took heavy damage. 5 were destroyed completely. But the Voidborn were not used to enemies who fought back so fiercely. Their tactics became confused. "They expected us to retreat after the first losses," Sam observed. "They don't understand human determination." Frank nodded. "Let's show them something else they don't expect. Helm, bring us about. We're going to target their command ship directly." The Defiance turned sharply and accelerated toward the largest enemy vessel. "Captain, that's risky," Sam warned. "Their weapons outrange ours." "Yes, but they don't expect a direct assault. Sometimes the boldest move is the safest." The Defiance charged forward, taking hits but pressing on. When they came within range, Frank gave the order. "All weapons, fire." The human flagship unleashed everything it had. The Voidborn command ship shields flickered and failed. A second barrage tore through its hull. "Enemy command ship crippled," reported the weapons officer. Without central coordination, the Voidborn fleet fell into disarray. The flanking human ships closed in, trapping them between 3 forces. 2 hours later, the battle was over. 7 Voidborn ships had been destroyed. The rest retreated into deep space. The human fleet had lost 8 ships and over 300 crew members. Every surviving vessel had taken damage, but they had won their first victory. Admiral Daniels looked around the battle-scarred bridge. "Send teams to the mining outpost. Let's get those people to safety." Later, in the ship's medical bay, Frank visited wounded crew members. Despite their injuries, many asked the same question. "Did we win, Captain?" "Yes," he told them each time. "We won today." Back at the Galactic Assembly, Edward received news of the victory. He immediately requested an emergency session. When the gathered diplomats were seated, Edward took the floor. "Less than 1 day after humanity declared war, our forces engaged the Voidborn at Ta City," he announced. "The Voidborn fleet has been defeated. The mining colony has been saved." Stunned silence filled the hall. No one had expected humans to survive their first encounter with the Voidborn, let alone win. "How is this possible?" asked the Arcturian diplomat. "Your technology is inferior." "Technology isn't everything," Edward replied. "Courage, determination, and the willingness to fight for what's right count for more than you might think." The serious representative stood. "My government wishes to formally join the human-led coalition against the Voidborn." One by one, other diplomats rose to join them. Not all, but more than Edward had hoped for. The speaker's crystal form glowed brightly. "It seems humanity has done what this assembly could not. You have united us in purpose." Edward shook his head. "Not yet, but we've made a start." As he left the hall, Edward knew this was just the beginning. One battle didn't win a war, but it showed everyone that the Voidborn could be defeated. And sometimes, hope was the most powerful weapon of all. 1 month after the battle at Ta City, the human embassy on the assembly station had changed. What was once a quiet diplomatic office was now a busy war room. Maps and tactical displays covered the walls. Representatives from 7 alien species worked alongside humans, planning the next moves against the Voidborn. Edward walked through the room, nodding to the various teams. He stopped beside Lisa, who was working with a Tellarite engineer on shield modifications. "How's it coming?" he asked. "The Tellarite shields are amazing," Lisa said. They're helping us adapt them to our ships. This could cut our losses by half in the next battle. Edward smiled. What had begun as humanity standing alone had grown into something more. The younger, more adaptable species of the assembly had rallied to Earth's cause. They called themselves the Coalition. A communication officer approached Edward. Ambassador, Admiral Daniels is online for your daily briefing. Edward moved to a private room where Olivia's face appeared on a screen. She looked tired but satisfied. Good news, Edward, she said. The repairs to the fleet are nearly complete. The Aronian shipyards have been working day and night. And the new intelligence from the Vega Scouts? Edward asked. Confirmed. We've located what appears to be a major void-borne staging area in the Epsilon Indi system. It's where they're launching attacks from. Edward considered this news. If we could hit them there, it would cripple their operations in this sector, Olivia finished. But it won't be easy. Our best count shows at least 30 void-borne ships guarding the base. The Assembly elders are still refusing direct military aid, Edward told her. But they've agreed to provide defensive technology for humanitarian purposes. Olivia laughed. Politicians, they're the same everywhere, even when they're made of crystal or have 6 legs. At least it gives us access to their advanced shield and sensor tech, Edward replied. Captain Russell's team is already integrating it into the Defiance. Speaking of Russell, Olivia said, he's developed an unusual battle plan for Epsilon Indi. I'm sending it to you now. It's creative. Edward reviewed the plan on his tablet. It was bold, perhaps even reckless. Very human. Will it work? It's risky, Olivia admitted. But the Voidborn still don't understand how humans fight. They expect logical, predictable attacks. This is anything but. Later that day, Edward met with the leaders of the Coalition species. The Tellarite commander, General Vorks, studied Russell's battle plan with a frown. This attack pattern is chaotic, he rumbled. No logical enemy would expect it. Exactly, Edward said. The Voidborn have superior technology, but they're predictable. They haven't faced species like ours that embrace unconventional tactics. The Aronian leader, a tall female named Solana, nodded in agreement. My analysis teams have studied the Ta City battle. The Voidborn became confused when humans didn't retreat after taking losses. In 5 days, the combined fleet will be ready, said the representative from Sirius. This will be the largest offensive against the Voidborn yet. Edward looked around the room at their allies. Each species had joined for different reasons. Some sought revenge for attacked colonies. Others recognized the Voidborn would eventually come for them too. All had shown courage by defying the Assembly's official position of caution. We've come a long way in a short time, Edward said. A month ago, humanity stood alone. Now we stand together. On the Defiance, Captain Russell and Sam reviewed the final details of their plan. The Voidborn command structure is centralized, Sam noted. Their ships take direction from the largest vessel. If we can disrupt that command, the entire fleet could fall into chaos. Frank finished. But getting close enough won't be easy. Sam pulled up detailed scans of Voidborn ships. There's something else. Our science team has detected unusual energy patterns in the command vessels. Almost like... Like what? Frank asked. Like a single consciousness controlling everything, Sam said quietly. What if the Voidborn aren't just a species? What if they're all connected somehow? Frank stared at the data. If that's true, it changes everything about how we fight them. As both the diplomats and warriors prepared for the coming battle, none of them realized they were about to discover the true nature of their enemy. And that knowledge would come at a terrible price. The Coalition fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Epsilon Indi system. 35 ships from Earth, 22 from their alien allies, all prepared for the biggest battle of the war so far. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Daniels stood with Captain Russell and Sam Howard. The tactical display showed the Voidborn base ahead, a massive structure orbiting the system's fourth planet. Dozens of enemy ships surrounded it. "All ships report ready, Admiral," said the communications officer. Olivia nodded. "Begin Operation Thunderstrike." The Coalition fleet split into 5 smaller groups, each taking a different approach vector toward the Voidborn base. The Defiance led the central group directly toward the target. "Enemy ships are moving to intercept," Sam reported. "They're forming a standard defensive pattern." Frank smiled grimly. "Just as we expected. They still think in predictable ways." The human strategy was anything but predictable. The 5 groups suddenly changed course in different directions, confusing the Voidborn response. 2 groups pressed forward aggressively while others hung back. "The Voidborn are dividing their forces," Sam said. "They're trying to cover all approaches." "Phase 2, Olivia ordered. The seemingly retreating Coalition ships suddenly accelerated forward at maximum speed. The Voidborn, who had moved to chase them, were caught out of position. The space around Epsilon Indi lit up with energy weapons and explosions. Coalition ships took damage but kept pressing forward. "We've broken through their outer defenses," Frank reported. "The path to the command base is open." "Launch the strike team," Olivia ordered. The Defiance released 3 smaller, faster ships. Each carried specially trained troops and scientists. Their mission: board the Voidborn command structure and plant a disruption device that Sam had developed based on her discovery about the Voidborn consciousness. Sam turned to Frank. "I should be on those ships. I know the device better than anyone." "You're needed here," Frank replied firmly. "With respect, Captain, if something goes wrong with the device, no one else can fix it." Frank looked at Admiral Daniels, who nodded. "Go, but come back." Sam ran to the shuttle bay and boarded the last strike team ship before it launched. Minutes later, they were approaching the massive Voidborn base. "Their defenses are still focused on our main fleet," the pilot reported. "We have a clear approach to docking Bay 7. The strike team ships slipped into the base through what appeared to be a cargo entry. Once inside, they found an alien environment. Dark, with strange pulsing lights and surfaces that seemed almost alive. "Sensors showed the central control chamber is 3 levels up," said the team leader. "We move fast and quiet." The human soldiers advanced through the Voidborn structure. Twice they encountered enemy patrols, tall, shadowy figures that moved with unnatural grace. Both times, they defeated them without raising an alarm. When they reached the central chamber, Sam gasped. In the center was not a control system but a massive pulsing organism, like a giant brain connected to countless tendrils that spread throughout the base. "It's just as I thought," she whispered. "The Voidborn aren't individual beings. They're extensions of this central intelligence." "Will your device still work?" asked the team leader. Sam studied the brain-like structure. "Yes, but it needs to be placed directly on the central mass. The area's too heavily guarded for a direct approach," the team leader said after studying the room. Sam took the device from her pack. "I'll go through the maintenance shaft. It leads right above the central mass." "That's a one-way trip," the team leader warned. "The radiation levels in those shafts are lethal." "If this works, it ends the war," Sam replied simply. "Get the rest of the team back to the ships. Set the charges as planned." Before anyone could stop her, Sam entered the narrow maintenance shaft. She crawled through, feeling the effects of the radiation almost immediately. Her skin burned, her vision blurred, but she kept moving. When she reached the position above the central mass, Sam could see the entire organism below her. She activated the device, a specialized electromagnetic pulse generator designed to disrupt the unique energy pattern of the Voidborn consciousness. "For Earth," she whispered, and dropped the device directly onto the center of the alien brain. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The entire structure shuddered. The lights flickered. Throughout the base and across the entire Voidborn fleet, the shadowy figures stopped moving, suddenly disconnected from their controlling intelligence. Sam never made it back to the shuttle. but her sacrifice changed everything. Back on the Defiance, Frank watched in amazement as the Voidborn ships stopped firing and began drifting aimlessly. "What's happening?" Olivia demanded. "Sam did it," Frank said quietly. "She cut off the head of the snake." The Battle of Epsilon Indi ended in total victory for the Coalition. Without their central intelligence, the Voidborn were helpless. The cost had been high. 11 Coalition ships destroyed and countless lives lost, including Samantha Howard. But the war had just turned decisively in humanity's favor. 1 year after the Battle of Epsilon Indi, the Galactic Assembly Hall looked very different. The curved rows of seats had been rearranged. New species had joined, taking places among the older races. And at the center, where only the most respected civilizations sat, was a section for humanity. Edward Collins stood at the main podium, addressing the full assembly. He wore a formal diplomatic uniform with new medals that recognized his service in the war. "Today marks 1 year since the defeat of the Voidborn at their main staging area," he said. "In that time, our combined forces have pushed them back to their home system. The threat to this galaxy has been contained." Applause filled the hall. Even the oldest, most reserved species joined in. The victory over the Voidborn had changed everything. "Let us remember the cost of this victory," Edward continued. "Over 6,000 Coalition personnel gave their lives. Countless civilians were lost before we could stop the Voidborn advance. We honor their sacrifice." The hall fell silent for a moment of remembrance. Edward thought of Sam Howard and so many others who had died to bring peace. After the ceremony, Edward walked with Admiral Daniels through the station's memorial garden. A new monument had been unveiled, listing the names of those lost in the war. Sam's name was near the top, along with the simple words, "She saved us all." "The assembly has changed," Olivia remarked. "They've created a permanent defense force. Ships from 20 species now patrol the borders." Edward nodded. "They learned what we already knew. That peace sometimes must be defended through strength. And you've been appointed to the Executive Council," Olivia said, "the first human to hold such a position." "Times change," Edward replied. "The Assembly now values our perspective. They see that youth and boldness have their place alongside age and wisdom." They stopped at a viewport overlooking the combined fleet. Human ships flew alongside vessels from across the galaxy. The EF's Defiance, now commanded by Frank Russell with the rank of captain, held a position of honor at the center. "Will they come back?" Olivia asked quietly. "The Voidborn? Perhaps. But next time, we'll be ready. Together." Later that day, Edward attended a private ceremony in the human embassy. President Kelly of Earth appeared via hologram to dedicate a memorial wall for the 8,000 colonists lost at Proxima. "Their deaths sparked our resolve," the president said. "Their memory inspired us to stand and fight when others counseled retreat. Today, humanity has a new place in the galaxy because we refuse to abandon our principles." After the ceremony, Lisa approached Edward with a data tablet. "The Council is requesting your input on the reconstruction of the outer colonies." Edward took the tablet. "What about Proxima?" "Survey teams found something remarkable," Lisa said. 300 colonists survived by hiding in the deep mines. They're coming home." For the first time in many months, Edward felt tears in his eyes. Not all had been lost. There was still hope for a new beginning. That evening, Edward stood alone at the great window in his office, looking at the stars. A historian had come earlier to record his account of the war for the Assembly archives. Ambassador Collins, the historian, had asked, "In your view, when did the tide turn? When did victory become possible?" Edward had thought carefully before answering. "It wasn't when we won our first battle. It wasn't when we formed the coalition. It wasn't even when we discovered the Voidborn weakness. Then when?" The historian pressed. "It was the moment a human diplomat announced, 'We're going to war,'" Edward had replied. "Because in that moment, we chose to stand and fight rather than submit, and that choice inspired others to stand with us." Now, looking at the peaceful stars, Edward reflected on how much had changed. Humanity had come to the stars as newcomers, seen as children by the older races. Now they were respected as equals, perhaps even leaders in some ways. The price had been high, but the lesson was clear. In the face of evil, action was always better than inaction. Courage always better than fear. And sometimes, the youngest voice in the room was the one that needed to be heard the most. The galaxy would never be the same again, and neither would humanity.